Better Preach, Episode 75, Generational Impact with Jim Beckman. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a podcaster, speaker, and consultant, and I'm so excited to join you on your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. Jim Beckman has seen it all, from being a part of the onset of Steubenville Conferences spreading nationally, to ministering to Columbine High School students in the wake of that tragedy in 1999, to launching White Disciple, and so much more. He has truly had a generational impact on the Catholic Church in America. But that impact has a cost. And we dig into the mark that lifelong ministry can have and the need for new ways of supporting people giving their lives to serve the church. This is an incredible conversation with an incredible leader. I'm so excited for you to hear what we discussed. Jim Beckman serves as the Executive Director of ImpactCenter, a Catholic apostolate dedicated to ministering to ministry leaders in the church. He is the former Executive Director of Evangelization and Catechesis for the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. Jim has been involved with diocesan and parish ministry, evangelization, and leadership development for many years. A graduate of Franciscan University and the Augustine Institute, Jim has served in various roles of leadership for national, regional, and local ministry. He is a dynamic and passionate speaker and has a great love for the Catholic Church. He and his wife, Meg, live in Littleton, Colorado, with their 5 children. And before we start, be sure to stop by and say hi on Instagram at Better Preach. Would love to connect there. Let's get into it. Jim Beckman, welcome to the Better Preach podcast. I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
It's great to be here, Ryan. After all of this time of trying, we finally made it happen.
We did. Has actually been one of my favorite things about this podcast is to connect with leaders in ministry, but also people who I've looked up to for many years. And you are certainly one of those figures in the Catholic Church. And so I was excited to connect. Your name has come up a handful of times, whether it's Mark Hart or Paul George or Annie Hickman, as a key mentor to them, who have gone on to be, influential voices, both on stages, but in their ministry locally, where God's doing powerful things. But they're incredible communicators. And to a man, each one of them, as I asked them who some of their greatest influences were, your name came up in each of those instances. So you were one of those people that I thought, I'd love to have you on, Jim, and get a sense of the arc of how things have been moving and shifting now in the 21st century. Where are things going in ministry? And you've had your pulse on all of that. But I'd like to start with you and with that same question. Who was someone, as you got started in ministry, that really poured into you and made a sizable impact as you got started?
As you asked that question, I would point to Father Mike Scanlon, Father John Bertolucci, Father Francis Martin. Like when I was a student at Franciscan, those 3 priests in particular really invested a ton in me. Father John Bertolucci, I had an interesting relationship with him. He, at one point he was traveling back and forth teaching classes, but not living in Steubenville. I think he was in New York or something. Father Francis Martin too was living in DC. He would come, he would come in on Tuesday and leave on Thursday. And I somehow became the driver for those priests, which was just phenomenal. So like I would go pick them up separately, but I would pick them up, get them to campus, and then on Thursday I have to take them back to the airport, which meant, that I had about a 35, 45 minute car ride with both of them twice a week, which then led to lunches and dinners and other conversations. And then I started working, I think, the summer of my freshman year for the Christian Outreach Office in the summers for the summer conferences. And over the next several years, I got very involved with the conferences and my summer of my sophomore year, I started leading the youth conference.
Well, the right place at the right time. And had a conversion unfolded already in a significant way in your life at that point?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I had a conversion very young at the age of 10, but that involved a miraculous healing. So, I mean, I was pretty sold out, at a very young age. And I think almost left the Catholic faith during high school because I got very involved in the Baptist church where I was growing up in rural Iowa. Ended up, my parents heard about Franciscan. My older sister went there, and then my brother was just a year older than me went. And so Steubenville kind of reconnected my, Protestant evangelical conversion in, high school years, rooted it back to Catholic faith.
Wow.
In a way that was very powerful for me.
So that conversion had already happened. You're on campus. And then also the Christian Outreach Office and getting connected with what would become or what were the Steubenville Youth Conferences. Is that right?
All through my years going to school, was very involved with the youth conferences, ended up taking over as the main MC right about the time that we were splitting from the youth conference to now youth and young adult.
Right.
And then for a number of years after I graduated, probably another 5 or 6 years, I was working full time for the university and helping run all of those things. At a certain point, there was a financial crisis for Steubenville. They had to let me go. And I kept trying to find a job in the Steubenville area, but just nothing was really working. So I ended up taking a position down in Alexandria, Louisiana, where Paul George was from. That's actually where I met Paul and I was working for his mom and for Bishop Sam Jacobs. And so what's really kind of fascinating, and it's way too long of a story, so let me give you just the thumbnail version of this. But I ended up having to move from Steubenville to Louisiana. Sitting at dinner one night with Bishop Sam Jacobs, we came up with this idea. What if we did a Steubenville conference not in Steubenville?
Right.
Hey, we could call it Steubenville South.
Right.
And it was just like, it was a joke, honestly. But the next day, he's calling me to his office saying, I really think we need to pray about this.
Yeah.
And, next thing you know, we're doing Steubenville South, the very first remote Steubenville conference. 4 months later, I lose my job in Alexandria, panic, scrambling, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. End up finding a youth ministry position in Littleton, Colorado. And a year and a half later, we're doing the second remote conference, Steubenville of the Rockies.
Wow.
Like God literally moved me to the first two cities that launched, what now is 50, 60,000 kids every summer in 20 different locations. So, again, right place, right time. I just happened to be being moved and had all of these connections back with people who are still working for the conference office. And when I moved to a new city, I was like, hey, let's take the boilerplate template, and do it now in a different city. And I don't think anybody was thinking back then how much it would grow and expand, and the kind of fruit it would bear over time. But it was powerful,
Why do you think it caught fire in the way that it has? What has been kind of the secret sauce of those youth conferences? Now, again, enduring for decades. What do you think was at the heart of why that has endured?
Yeah, it's a hard question. Both an encounter with Christ, but then an empowerment with the Holy Spirit. I think that's what the kind of the key ingredients of the conferences always were for me. And I know they've struggled over the past couple of years trying to recover, on the other side of COVID. But I'm praying for them all the time that they'll kind of regain the traction.
An encounter with Christ, an empowerment of the Holy Spirit. And Bishop Sam Jacobs would have, knowing him, a leader in the charismatic renewal and a gifted preacher in his own right, that seems like a great next place for the youth conference to go to. And then who were some of the catalysts in Littleton or Denver area? Yourself, and did the bishop have to get behind it at that point, or were there other other sort of sponsoring groups?
It was not too long after the World Youth Day event here.
Right.
So there was all of this kind of lingering momentum from the World Youth Day event in '93.
Sure.
And all of these people that were wanting to kind of like recapture that, and the Steubenville Conference, I think it just provided a vehicle that could gather all of those people around something to work together. So we literally had people from all parts of the Archdiocese on a leadership team that were helping make it happen, So,
Oh, that's great context. Of course. Yeah. That was, again, talk about a seminal moment for the young church in America, World Youth Day, 1993. What about for yourself? What were some of your first experiences of giving talks? And do you have a story either around one of your first talks or a worst talk? Does anything come to mind? You've certainly had a lot of experience.
So I'm going to go with the first thing that came to my mind, because it's like one of those funny experiences where, when I moved to Littleton, there was just all of these things that happened very kind of close together. First of all, I had just gotten married. We're having our first kid. 2 or 3 years after I got here, the Columbine shooting happens. But there was that big event in St. Louis with the Holy Father.
Yeah, I was there.
And I something happened where, the parish youth ministry just exploded under my leadership. And you would think that I'm saying exploded because of me. And I would say exploded because I didn't know what I was doing. And kids have started showing up, and all of these adults were helping. And, it was kind of a beautiful experience of fruitfulness. And in some ways I look back on that time and marvel, because, and it's complicated to kind of get into the under context. But when I got married in 1995, and went on my honeymoon, I started having all of these, kind of weird experience memories, like jagged, fragmented memories coming. That it made a difficult honeymoon, honestly. But what I ended up realizing was that I had all of these repressed memories from childhood abuse stuff that had happened, and it was just emerging at that point in my life.
Wow.
I come home from the honeymoon, start going to see a counselor. Bishop Sam Jacobs was just pivotal in my life during that time with some inner healing stuff and kind of being with me and all of that. Well, then I lose my job and we end up moving. Meg's pregnant with our first kid. I'm taking on this job in this big parish. Just a couple years later, the Columbine shooting happens. I never went back and finished what I needed to, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I look back on that whole time in my life now, because years later, I would say over the last year and a half, God finally wrecked me.
Wow.
And brought me to a place where I had to deal with my stuff,
Yeah.
And that's been beautiful. That's been beautiful, powerful, and healing in ways that I can't even explain. And in some ways, I kind of wonder, how did I limp along the way that I did with all of that deep stuff, almost like unprocessed. I became aware of it, but then just didn't have time, I suppose,
Wow.
to do what I needed to do to really get through it, And the marvel is God used me despite all of that. And there was incredible fruitfulness. But it's easy now to stand back and look at it and say, okay, that was all God, because during those years of my life, like I really was like a train wreck waiting to happen, and only by the grace of God that never happened. If that makes sense,
What happened in the last year and a half, 2 years, that enabled that to be addressed and be fully then entered into? What was different about the last 2 years?
Went through a very difficult kind of work situation where there, big change. I didn't really have control over it. And it, in some ways, it kind of triggered all of those, like the key wounds of abuse, like I went through, would be powerlessness, betrayal, and ambivalence. Like you're being hurt by somebody, but it's pleasurable in ways that just messes with your head, I guess. So, like all of those wounds were just fully triggered in me during the last year. I reread a book that I probably read 4 times over my life, Trustful Surrender to Divine Providence, Claude de Colombier and Saint John Baptiste de La Salle. But there's a chapter in that book that asks the question, how could God do something good through, crushing misfortune? And they go on to explain that God sometimes will take us unaware through hardship and tragedy so that he can, in a certain sense, put us under anesthesia where he can get us on the operating table and cut deep with the knife. And that's what I feel like happened. Like I didn't like what I was going through. I didn't like the circumstances. And it did a lot to kind of destabilize me in a way that was very, very difficult to recover. But I think God had to allow those deep wounds in me to kind of resurface in a way that I would finally deal with them and deal with them with his love, right? Like he needed to love me in those places. And because I kept holding on to the wounds, and it wasn't like I was clinging to the wounds because I wanted to, but when you do have woundedness like that in you, deep in you, you kind of avoid letting people love you in those places, and kind of a lot of self-protection, self-management, and a lot of lack of integration. Like I think, like that the big healing for me over the past year and a half has been Dr. Peter Malinowski, the Interior Integration for Catholics podcast, and I've joined the Resilient Catholic community, where I'm with a group of guys that are all kind of dealing with some of these same kinds of things in their life. So yeah, I don't know. So it's a long story and kind of off topic of what this is today. But Ryan, so many people in leadership roles and in ministry are struggling with all kinds of brokenness. And once you start getting downstream in any type of leadership, you actually become more and more afraid of being vulnerable about how you're broken, because now your livelihood is at stake, and so you really can't talk with anybody or be open or transparent at all about how you're struggling. And I'm convinced that the vast majority of people, even the big stage names in the Catholic world that are giving talks and leading things, everybody's got these kinds of things that they need to deal with and need to process and need to heal from. But sometimes the way that we set things up makes that very, very difficult to do,
Wow, thank you for just your transparency. I think it absolutely applies. One of my curiosities is, how do we help people in real time, like repair the plane while it's in flight,
Right.
And I think we don't always have the luxuries of, a sabbatical year every 7 years to get the healing and care that we need. In a sense, if we're doing it right, we are pouring ourselves out. And so I wonder what can be done to support ministers, preachers. What can be done to better head things off and support them in and through these settings?
Well, and that's kind of what I've gone back to. I had started a ministry years ago called ImpactCenter.
Yeah.
That was really, the whole focus was ministering to ministers. I think back when I first started, 16, 17 years ago, my focus was trying to help youth ministers last. Like that was kind of my quote was, I want to change the stat that the average lifespan of a Catholic youth minister is 18 to 24 months.
Right.
How do we grow that?
Right.
Longevity. Now fast forward years later, I feel like I'm an Army field medic.
Yeah.
I'm out on the open battlefield of the church. I've kind of shifted my whole financial model to raising a mission support team, and I have people that are contributing every month to just free me up to be a missionary.
Yes.
And what I'm
Yep.
finding is the vast majority of people who need my help can't pay for it.
Yeah.
So that's
Yes.
why I have to be set up the way that I am right now.
I love that. Yep.
So I went over the last year, and I just had a board meeting last week, and I was trying to communicate to my board what I've been doing, and what like how it has kind of played out. And there's 100. I'm calling them the 115 of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
So I had 115 people that God brought me into their life in some way to walk with. And, like 20 some percent, I think 22% were just one time.
Yeah.
I just had one conversation with them. I met them on a
Yep.
retreat, or I met them at something that I was doing, or met a conference, and they had some questions. They needed somebody to just kind of talk with them about where they were struggling. And that was what they needed. Another 54%, it was that one conversation led to 3 or 4 more.
Yeah.
They just needed the accompaniment, really. They just needed somebody that would ask them hard questions,
Mm-hmm.
be in their face, so to speak. I joked with a couple of people over time, like, an Army field medic sometimes has to rip your clothes off to help you. And you're not being very honest with me. Because you could tell somebody who's struggling, and you're just like, look, you got to be real. You have to be vulnerable, or I can't really do anything for you. But what I found is of that 115, 31%, almost a full third, were in such dark places. Like it was jarring. I kind of say now at the end of the year, nothing surprises me anymore. Everything from alcohol addiction to sexual addiction to drug addiction to marriage problems to anxiety and depression and suicidal stuff. And like, this is kind of what I'm dealing with almost on a weekly basis. And these are all people in full-time ministry.
Right.
A full third of the people
Right.
over the past year,
Right.
And so I know I just feel this, kind of humbling honor and privilege to walk in the places where I'm walking with people. And, like you said, most of the time it's not an option to take a sabbatical, but there's a number of people where I've had to help them resign.
Yeah.
Like you need to step down right now to get healthy, to get better,
Mm-hmm.
and let's walk you in the direction that's going to get you to that kind of place, So that's kind of what I'm doing. In some ways, I feel like the Lord's just called me to step into that space right now at this time of my life, and just be there for people in ministry,
What are some of the practical things that before it hits 11, on the dial, where things are so cranked up, and where things aren't so intense? What are some things that you see that would be most helpful for people who are in full-time ministry?
Yeah, and this is kind of the heart of what I feel like I'm doing these days,
Yeah.
is trying to do exactly that. How do we get ahead of somebody being in a crisis? I think number one is just prayer. Like, any of the people that are in that 1/3, for me over the past year, stopped praying months ago.
Is that right?
Really praying. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can put in time in prayer and not really be praying.
Yeah.
Or you can approach prayer to get the next best thing for you to give in a talk, or you're using the spiritual life in a certain way to run your ministry. That's not really praying. And So what you find, that's just a clear pattern, is people are falling out of that really disciplined practice of being in relationship, where the Lord is really moving in their heart. He's revealing himself to them. He's asking them hard questions, in his own discipleship of them. Like, if you're not in that kind of dynamic living relationship of prayer, things are going to start going off track. I think the other thing is, like, I'm just a huge believer that whenever I'm called by God to do something, it's actually less about what he's calling me to do and more about what he wants to do in me. And I would say the vast majority of us get that backwards, right? Like, we think that God's called us to do something because we have all of these gifts, and now he wants to use us to share the gifts that he's given us, which is all about us. But it's the wrong direction. Like, it is all about us, but I truly believe that God is calling us to do something because of ways that he wants to love us and ways that he wants to bring about conversion in us. And it's much, he'll bear fruit through us, and he'll minister to people, and he'll even build the kingdom through us. But I don't know if you've noticed in your life how things that you've built up sometimes all fall apart. And you ever find yourself asking the question, like, what is God thinking? Like, why would he allow that to all happen? Like, this was such a good, fruitful thing. Like, why is he letting it all fall apart? I've had that happen enough times that it's caused me to ask the question, like, I don't think this is what God's all about. And I see the conversion that he's done in me. I see how he's drawing me deeper into relationship with him through the hard things that I've gone through. I've had that happen enough times where I'm just convinced, like, okay, I think God really is more interested in my conversion and my pursuit of holiness than he is in what he can do through me. And I think if you don't have that perspective, or you lose sight of that perspective, I think that's how you start to get on that edge of, sometimes tipping over into crisis places,
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced that in family life and in raising, kids. That my wife and I adopted 4 boys through foster care, and I just have had to stop comparing the results, in their life with all of these other happy, healthy, holy Catholic families that I'm surrounded by. Which, if I got into their in their closed doors, we'd see similar challenges and similar frustrations and similar pain points and difficulties. Just ours at times feels more pronounced, and like, this just isn't working. And I've experienced that in ministry as well, when all of a sudden the thing just comes crashing down, and you think, well, what have we been doing? And like you said, that in both instances, I would just confirm that the at one of my lowest moments with my children happened on a Father's Day, and things were just chaotic and terrible at breakfast, and I was just fed up. And I was like, if any, why, just at least Father's Day, could we not
on
just,
any day of the year?
Please,
come on.
Don't you guys know? And they're probably like, yeah, we know, and we're doing this on purpose. But anyway, like, they were going nuts, and I just had enough. And I stormed off into the bedroom, left the breakfast table, and I just start weeping. And it was embarrassing, but it's how I felt. And I even had this sense of, like, do I regret doing this? I even entertained kind of that idea. And then the Lord put this word on my heart of gift. And I was like, yeah, I know. We're such an incredible gift to them. And where would they be without us, and all this stuff. And he again gently corrected that and said, no, that they're my gift to you. How else was I going to get to you? The prideful, self-reliant, control freak. How else was I going to get to you, Ryan? And that was an amazing turning point that I thought, somehow God does, and we can't explain it. There's no like mathematical equation that you could write out that would resolve those two sides of God's inexhaustible love and his ability to pull the good and even his will out of all of that. When we just think of things so linearly and kind of up and to the left, or up and to the right rather, as to what our goals are. And that's just not, I guess that's not God's economy. And wow, that's really powerful. Anyway, thank you for letting me share that. But that's it.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's, like so many people, like I find in a lot of conversations, and people are so kind of panicked and just have all this anxiety about what's going on in the church right now and how bad things are. And, even some of what I've shared over the past year, like that, I'm finding pretty consistently about 30% of the people that I'm dealing with are just in these places of deep need. You could find yourself standing back and looking at that landscape and saying, what the heck is going on? Like, where is God and what's his plan? And I don't know, like I would say pretty confidently, I've been doing quite a bit of work with Father Ricardo and Acts 29 over the past year. And he has this line that he says that I just love. God is not concerned. God's not looking at the current landscape of things and saying like, oh my gosh, what happened? How did this go off the rails? Like, this is actually his plan.
Yeah.
This is how God's going to bring about a greater outpouring of his mercy. And this is how he's going to bring out a wave of evangelization. This is how he's going to stir people's hearts to come back to him, is actually by sometimes allowing us to kind of come to the end of ourselves. And how beautiful that is. It's painful to watch it. It's hard to see it as things almost seem to unravel. But sometimes God has to remove himself to remind us who he is. We have to make sure that we're in love with the giver and not the gifts that he provides. So sometimes desolation is a necessary part of conversion. And that's what we're going through right now, is a period of desolation in our unique time in history.
Reminds me of maybe a sort of controversial statement a bit from C.S. Lewis, that he talks about pain as God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. That there's a way in which God will and can and does use it all, and it doesn't usually match, our expectations, and he's drawing us into that closer relationship. That's what resulted that day with me. And it fundamentally shifted how I saw my family, how I saw myself, how I understood God's providence in all of this. And I'm really, really grateful. And you've seen a lot. I mean, thank you for sharing that, just that difficulty, even from your honeymoon and those repressed memories that were flashed, before your eyes, and that you saw some of the pain from your past, and now, working through all of that, and had been working through that. You were a part of, a Catholic church that was near Columbine High School. That was a seminal moment in American history, and you were in and around that setting. How did an experience like that impact you and change you? And maybe give a little context for how St. Francis Cabrini, the Catholic church you were working for, connected or interfaced with that community at that time. That was 1990, April, was it April 99, if I'm remembering?
April 99. Yeah. And it's funny, I'm actually realizing that your opening question was my worst talk experience, and I don't think I ever even answered that question. But it's all around the same thing. And I don't remember if the St. Louis, the papal visit to St. Louis was before or after the Columbine.
It was January 99.
I had been invited because of all of that growth in our parish. I had been invited to be one of the speakers at the event in St. Louis.
Yeah.
So I think of it as my worst talk experience, because
Is that right?
I was on the stage, the outside stage, so I wasn't in the Keel Center. I don't remember. I don't know how many thousands of people were there. There were, tens of thousands, but the outdoor was kind of like, the outdoor stage was like the overflow crowd.
Right.
And I literally just was sweating bullets preparing for this talk, and biggest thing of my life, and biggest speaking moment that I think I'd ever been at that point. And Phil Banowitz introduces me. I walk up to the microphone to start giving this talk that I literally stayed up all night long preparing. Like I was just trying so hard to just give the talk of my life, and I knew I needed to nail it and hit it out of the park. And all of these eyes were on me, all of that stuff, and I walk up to the microphone and I started my first sentence, and somebody screams, "Here he comes." And thousands of people just literally turn and run for the street as the Holy Father comes down the road, and I look at Phil,
gosh.
and he was like, keep going. And I'm like, there literally was nobody in front of me, maybe two or three of my own teenagers from my youth group who stayed to support me.
Gosh.
And I gave the rest of my talk to nobody.
Oh my gosh. Is that right?
So it was like one of the worst talk experiences ever, and how that goes. Like, you kind of thrive off of audience feedback and
100%.
people facial expressions and stuff like that. Yeah. So my big moment arrived and left all in one fell swoop,
Oh my goodness. And you couldn't even probably enjoy the fact that the Holy Father is passing by. So, you're sort of trapped over here giving this talk to nobody, as the Vicar of Christ, drives by. That was a special moment. Yeah. That's awesome.
So then it was just, months later, April, when the Columbine shooting happened. And I mean, what a just crazy, surreal time of my life. I think in some ways, like we had talked about this earlier before we started recording, but I think some people are really called to be, kind of like that, like the big stage speaker, the Catholic speaker. I don't think I was ever called to that. I think over times I was jealous of others that were. I wanted to be that. I think if I was really honest in my heart, I think there was a part of me that really wanted that. That just wasn't what I was called to do. And I can look back over my life now and realize I was called to be in the trenches.
Yeah.
That's where I think God really works through me in people's lives. And I think during the Columbine shooting, that just became front and center. Like I just was with people day in and day out. And sometimes it wasn't so much about what you said in a talk. It was about how you were with them, and how you just loved them. And, probably one of the greatest times of brokenness that they'd ever experienced up till that point. And that's all we did at our parish. People still look back and talk about me and Monsignor Ken Leone, our pastor, and Steve Ingersano was there with us during that time.
Right.
Martin Doman was with us for a period of time, right at the shooting, when the shooting happened, and Kate Barta. We had a number of people on our staff, but then just dozens of volunteers. That whole community was just so together in just being present to people and just being a place where they could come and get whatever they needed, and so it was a powerful defining moment for me in my ministry.
Had you experienced anything quite like that kind of outpouring of being present to people, literally in the trenches? And had you had any experience like that leading up to that? And then it seems like it really had become almost a model or a template for the way the Lord might use you, and now is continuing to use you to be present with people, accompanying them through darkness and difficulty. Just see an interesting kind of bookend from that piece to where things are now.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, I think I probably, even from my childhood stuff, and struggled all through middle school and high school with, lots of blessings that I'd experienced. I mentioned that my dad had been miraculously healed when I was just a 10-year-old. I had no doubt that God existed and God was real. Like it was undeniable what I had seen. But kept having these other parts of me that were struggling with deep depression and, and I didn't understand until years later, like what was behind all of that stuff, But I don't know. I just think I've had a lot of tragedy and a lot of hardship and difficulty over the course of my life, probably in a way that allowed me to be in places like that where I could not run from it. I hate to say, can you be comfortable with tragedy? But maybe God allowed enough of it, that I actually was. And even though it wasn't comfortable, I wasn't running, and was able to stay in the tension of that with people in a way that was helpful for them, so that there's a gift in all of that. I don't know if I completely understand it, but I can see the gift.
So looking back then over 30 plus years, I think it's so interesting to think of you at kind of the beginning of the growth and expansion of the Steubenville Youth Conferences. It's been such an important piece of evangelization of the young church in America. Are things getting stronger? Are we getting better as a church at proclaiming the gospel, at making disciples? And where do you think things are headed?
Yeah, that's a deep question. I kind of have the conviction right now that, because I think everybody can see the poverty. There's a lot of poverty in the church and a lot of poverty of leadership and things going on right now that are concerning. But in the midst of all of that, it's like we have more content than we've ever had. There's more people talking and more presenting and more streaming platforms and access. You could get a talk on any topic, under the sun, about the faith or about discipleship. But I'm kind of the conviction that we actually need less talking and more coaching, mentoring. There's so much material that people actually can't process it and apply it and get it into the way that they're actually living, right? And so I don't know, like the last several times people have asked me to come give a talk, I've said, I'm not really giving talks these days. I'll come and lead a process session. I'll ask questions. Like if you want to have me, like, would you be willing to let me do something like that? And those are actually going phenomenal. I'm finding people really responsive. Like when you stand up in front of them and say, I'm actually not going to give you a talk today. People's eyes light up. Like it's weird in a crowd setting. Like people who are kind of, like you can see they're kind of bracing themselves for another, 40 to 45 minutes of somebody giving a talk. And when you start out with like, I'm actually not going to give you a talk today. People, I'm kind of interested in this. So I find that kind of an interesting time. One of the unique challenges with that is because there's so much available on these streaming platforms, which I've been a part of helping develop. Why Disciple, and I'm on a bunch of the stuff on the Forum platform, and I've done a lot of video things on other platforms. There's part of me that almost has a bit of regret over that right now, because you have a lot of people at local parishes that are just assuming I could never give a talk like that person. I could never be one of those great speakers. And now I don't have to. I'm just going to use them to run my RCIA class. I'm going to use these resources and these tools to do my youth ministry talks or whatever. And I actually think that's a huge negative.
Mm.
Because what it's done is it's taking the local person who is in the trenches,
Yeah.
and it's, many of them are somehow convinced that because I couldn't give a talk as well as some national figure, I'm not going to. I'm gonna let the national figure now give the talk. What they've actually removed is the personal application at the local level, right in front of a person, that is just so critical to help somebody actually take some aspect of the faith and implement it in their life in a way that's going to be sustainable, right? And
Mm.
so I kind of hope, in the coming years that we kind of move away from so many so many online presentations and get back to the gritty, real, person that's the closest point of human contact, feeling empowered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't give as good of a talk as maybe somebody else, but that's not what they need right now. They need you.
Yeah.
They need you to talk about how have you figured out how to live this in your life.
Yeah.
Uh, they don't need this big name speaker to unpack that.
Yeah. I love that you're pointing out the trade-off, the shadow of what many would say, it would be a golden era in terms of content creation. And it is, as to, there's been more accessibility to Catholic teaching worldwide than ever before, let's say. But what if it isn't present in my parish? And what if I don't see it lived in the pews next to me? And because not only will that person maybe not give as good a talk as some national figure, but they're going to do a better job at building a relationship than any of those national, ever could with
Right,
that
right,
young
yeah,
person or with
exactly.
that other person. What would you say to that youth minister, maybe to that director of religious education or director of faith formation, to encourage them to not press play? How would you coach or guide them to avoid that trap, if you will?
One of the things that we've done with Why Disciple, Annie Grandel and I have had lots of conversations about this, and we're kind of using language like, look, a resource like this is really meant to be like training wheels,
Yeah.
but you need to be the one riding the bike. So
Yeah.
if you need to use the training wheels and use some video studies to kind of help you learn how to engage and how to deliver content and how, but at some point you got to get the training wheels off and ride the bike yourself. Um, that would be the encouragement that I would have, is like, look, you could use aspects of Formed and Wild Goose and Ascension Press, and like there's all of these great tools out there, like you said, the golden era, right? But
Yeah.
like, you are the person who's standing in front of a group of people going through RCIA or going through confirmation prep or in the youth ministry or in an adult faith formation class or whatever. Like, they actually need somebody to model for them, what does this look like to actually live in my life with all of the other pressures and demands that we have around us today. And they're never going to get that. That's never going to be conveyed through a video presentation. They need somebody standing right there in the room, sitting at the table, drinking a cup of coffee with them to say, yeah, this is hard. This is really
Mm-hmm.
hard. One of the hardest things I've ever done, but it's possible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here's what I've done, and you're different. It's going to look a little different in your life. So let's figure out, what would this look like in your life?
Yeah.
Who's asking questions like that in the
Yeah.
typical parish today?
Yeah.
Very, very few people, right? That is where discipleship rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah. It has to be, it has always been, and it will continue to need to be person to person. And that's how the gospel spreads. And, there are these catalytic moments, whether it's a conference or even, a set of videos, but That's all a precursor to the reality of this being lived in everyday life. Jim, it's been great talking with you. Thanks so much for going awesome. There. Yeah, just being willing to just kind of share of your heart, your life, and what the unique kind of call that God has. You've had such a unique perspective on Catholic ministry and particularly youth ministry over the last couple of decades. And we're the beneficiaries of that. So thank you very much. How could people connect with you online if they wanted to learn more or kind of connect you into some things they're doing?
Well, my website is impactcenter.com. That'd probably be the easiest way to find me. Jim at impactcenter.com is my email.
Awesome. Well, I hope folks will connect. It's a great resource. Jim, thank you for your witness and for entering into this discussion of kind of where we've been and where we're going. And your perspectives are fresh and so helpful today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Great being with you.
Thanks. If this podcast has been helpful to you, I would love to hear about it. I'd love to hear the impact that these conversations have had for you as you're speaking, teaching, and preaching. And one of the best ways to do that is to send me an email at ryanohara.org/betterpreach. There's like a contact form there. Or you can leave a rating and written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That'd be awesome. You have millions of choices when you podcast. Thanks for press and play today. See you next time.